Hello and welcome to Deep Dive. My guest on today's subject is Ashish Bhandari, who is the MD and CEO of Thermax. Uh, Ashish, thank you very much for joining us on Deep Dive. Let's begin with the private capex cycle. We've been hearing about it for last 3 years about how it's expected to revive. We've not seen the broad-based revival. We're seeing sporadic coming from various sectors. What is your assessment on the private capex cycle?
Thank you, Sajid, and it's a pleasure to be here. Private capex, as we know, last year, Q4, it felt like things were starting to look better. November, December, even heading into January, many of the trends were starting to pick up. And then the Gulf War happened, which certainly tempered things quite a bit. As we see right now, there are multiple sectors where private capex is still continuing. And the first place I would start with is thermal power. India is looking at a shortage of power in the coming years, and thermal power in general, captive or utility, both places is seeing a big jump up, and that run is going to continue for the foreseeable future.
Hmm. We've seen I think last 18 months or so, we've seen a lot of power orders coming out, especially, and prior to that, we were looking at a lot of renewable orders coming in. Do you think what we see in the thermal is a revival of the entire thermal capex coming in, or is it just a base capacity which is increasing so that it caters to the entire grid stabilization, or for that matter the kind of targets that we have for renewable 500 gigawatts by 2030 and more than that in the next by 2035?
See, overall, India and the power shortage is a real story. You can see every year and every month, even in this current recent information that came out on industrial production, electricity usage and power usage has gone up and is going up much faster than we expected. You add to it the demand that will come from data centers, semiconductors, all these newer industries that are coming up, in addition to the general GDP growth. Power shortage is key. And then if you add Make in India and Atma, that is what is driving the revival of thermal power. And that is substantial. It is not just a small blip. We are talking about tens of gigawatts, somewhere between 50 to 100 gigawatts being added of thermal capacity, something that we haven't done for several years, certainly for more than a decade. Yeah, so this is a structural shift that is here. And this is in addition to, because the ramp up that you were talking about in power was more on the electrical side, where the grid capability, which was driven by renewables and storage and all that. In addition to that, thermal power will also now kick in as an area and a segment. So that is one area which is doing much better and will drive quite a bit of investment relative to what we would have thought previously. On the larger segments, both steel and cement continue to invest. Yeah, and steel is actually increasing its investment even in this cycle that we are talking about. There is steel expansion that is continuing. In the newer sectors that we talk about, the growth in data centers, the growth in electronics, solar, all three of these sectors is real. And for Thermax, this represents in need for water solutions, cooling solutions, and in many cases where steam is needed, many of these plants even need our boilers and our heating-related solutions. So all three of these sectors doing particularly well. Many other sectors, including textiles, have been holding their own. Sectors that are not doing as well is certainly ethanol, which was a big portion of our growth story a couple of years ago. Ethanol is overbuilt. People are saying, what is next? And isobutanol is being talked about as the next avatar of biofuels, which India can use as a diesel additive. That is being talked about, green methanol, SAF. So there are a variety of newer derivative products in this advanced biofuel segments that are being talked about, but they're all premature. There is not widespread technology alignment in some of these areas. So beyond the sectors that I talked about, I would say exports overall for India right now is a bright story. We see that at Thermax as well. But overall, India's competitiveness in the international space continues to improve. And in many geographies, our products are doing better and better with each passing year. So coming back to your question around private capex, I would say it is not a uniform story. Overall, we would like private capex to be growing, but it's not a bad story at all, given all the headwinds India has had from tariffs, from a relatively weak monsoon start, the Gulf War. We are holding our own and are doing surprisingly well, is how I would put it.
Ashish, so in that sense, we are seeing the private capex cycle evolving rather than, it's being limited to the traditional sectors in that sense, right?
Very
And
true.
if that is the case, uh, is it more to cater to the domestic demand, or is it more to cater to the export opportunity that brings in for many of the companies?
See, again, the story differs sector to sector. Yeah, the ones that we talked about for power, data centers, semiconductors, electronics, solar, all of that is for domestic demand. Yeah, because India's own needs in many of these sectors is quite high, and we have to continue to invest. And having strong domestic demand is a great place to be, because then you are less dependent on some of these economic moves that affect you globally. And this is a wonderful thing about India, that our domestic demand itself drives quite a bit of investment. In other areas that we look at, there we are driven more by exports and future. Yeah, chemicals is one area which is driven by exports. Textiles too is looking at exports. One area, rice mills. India was a big rice exporter, especially into the Middle East. And with some of the transportation routes not being available, I know many of the rice millers in India are really looking at investments a lot more carefully than they would in the past. So again, exactly like you said, yeah, the story is depends sector to sector. Private capex is in revival, but it is not uniform across all sectors. Some sectors are doing much better than others.
When you assess the economy and various sectors as a whole, one of the reasons to bring in the capex cycle is when you start having a higher utilization rate of your existing capacities. Are you seeing that 80-85% capacity utilization coming in various sectors? Because in the past cycle, we have seen that higher capacity utilization leads to companies planning much better, expanding, looking at expansion plans, but at that time in the past cycle, we have seen a lot of debt coming onto the books of companies. But today, the balance sheet is much more stronger, or much more cash in the books. The only question here is whether the current capacity is utilized well.
Hmm. And your questions is bang on, because unlike previous cycles, in this cycle, Indian industry has been a lot more reticent to taking on debt. And the answer differs depending on who you speak with. One, we are more cautious after the experience that we went through in that 2010 to 2013, 2014 period. The second reason is businesses were really looking for where will that growth come from. And for Thermax as well, the first few years after COVID, our capacity utilization was increasing, but we were really not sure where that big set of jumps will start to come in. In the last year and a half, we are starting to see those jump areas, like in the portion of our business where we do large boilers catering to exports and also to this thermal segment. We are now going ahead and increasing capacity quite significantly. In our cooling business as well, where we see data center business coming from US and from India, we are again increasing capacity. In chemicals also, we do know for sure in the next year, most likely we'll have to increase capacity. We are adding new capacity on the water side for very unique manufacturing capabilities that we think we need to. And a lot of that is our decisions that we have taken in the last 6 to 9 months in terms of these are areas we need to grow in and expand.
As a capital goods major, how are you transitioning yourself to align with those industries? Not just the traditional ones where typically the order values are much higher, but also the new age ones where the order values may not be much, but it's smaller in chunks and but high volume which comes in.
See, Thermax's business that way lends itself well. We have got industrial projects where we do project kind of businesses that cater to larger industries, and even there, our focus on exports, even beyond India's sectors that I talked about, is around waste to energy, getting into prestigious oil and gas projects in the Middle East, and certainly Africa too is going through quite a bit of an expansion. In addition, we are now starting to supply equipment for data centers in the US as well. But specifically to your question around these newer sectors, there are a couple of points that I would like to. First is on R&D and technology development, which is very important if you have to cater to these newer sectors effectively. You have to have products that you can say are capable of providing higher efficiency, higher uptime, or something unique from a capability perspective. And on the cooling side, as an example, for data centers in the US, we have developed very, very specific cooling technologies which allow us to compete not just in India, but with many global players and are capable of catering to the biggest growth area for data centers, which is the US. In addition, in areas like water, coming up with low energy usage, zero liquid discharge solutions, electric boilers, smart boilers, heat pumps, hybrid CLCT. So there are a variety of new technology areas, exactly like the way you were talking about, innovative products that may not be very high in value on a single order, but have the capability of building out a nice product business where you have repeated volumes, and then a big services business that is based on those volumes. And in many of these growth areas, that's our way in. How do you provide differentiated products for these segments?
And do you think the new age capex cycle will have a mix of services as well as hardware assigned to it? Is that the way you're looking at the new age businesses which are coming in?
Absolutely. I think if you take any of these scenes, asset utilization, asset uptime, all of these will become very critical factors. So for them, uptime and utilization and efficiency are not checkbox. For them, they are mission critical. So the choice of equipment, both in terms of new capex, but also services, I do expect over time as these industries continue. Right now, they're all going through their capex and infrastructure investment cycle. As they transition from investment to running the asset, a big services stream will also emerge.
Are you also looking at that particular vertical where you start getting services revenue as a recurring annuity kind of revenue coming in?
So from a timing perspective, services has been in our industrial products as an example, has been a big area of focus. How do you connect with assets, coming up with digital tools, what we call as Edge Live, and also focusing on specific products that lend itself to services around water, around steam, variety of applications that we can that lend itself well to services. We are working on those services. Is now in the industrial product side has crossed 10% of our revenue, and we would like it to go over the years to grow it to as much as 15%. We think we have line of sight in terms of newer ideas that get us out there. I think as a business, we are still not where global best-in-class companies are. Like the company that I used to work with, GE before, which had a lot of rotating equipment. For them, services was more than 20% of their revenue, and it was very profitable. So Thermax, as a product business, getting services up is very important. It'll take some time before we get to where the best in the world are.
The other one which is important to note is that in the last 5 years or more, you have seen the economy or street dependent on the government infrastructure or government capex which is coming in. And in the absence of a sustained capex takeoff from the private sector, the government capex is what everyone is relying on. How do you see? Do you think private capex is at the verge of getting take off, or is it going to be a steady, slow state, and government will have to fill in that gap?
So government business always helps. Yeah. And infrastructure spend in India for a country that is in deep need of infrastructure spend is always welcome and good. For Thermax specifically, we are not that dependent on infrastructure spend. And if anything, we are cutting our exposure to government business because much of that business is often L1 kind of reverse auction and whoever is the cheapest kind of a bid, which we are more and more walking away from. Yeah, so it is not that we are dependent on government business, but overall having government capex into the overall infrastructure is a good thing. Also, because as a country, we do need it. Yeah, we need roads, we need bridges, we need more trains, we need more fertilizers, we need more refining capacity. So all of that and all of that spending is welcome. Um, as we look forward, as I said, much of these industries that I was talking about where growth is happening for Thermax, power, steel, cement, data centers, electronics, semiconductors, textiles, none of these industries are government capex dependent for the most part. Everyone has some exposure or the other, but none of them are predominantly government capex driven. So I don't think it is just a story that private capex is not taking off. Private capex in aggregate may be looking like muted, but there are many sectors of private capex where significant investment is going in. And I know as Thermax itself, we are spending quite a bit of money, as I said, on capacity expansion. Similarly, many of our customers in many of these industries that I talked about are also investing in capacity increases and new projects.
Uh, you know, One thing which is coming through is very clearly that supply chains are leading to increased cost escalation for many of the companies, margin compression as well. Uh, how relevant is it while you're planning a private capex, especially with respect to supply chain, respect to the kind of currency movement that comes into play? Does it force companies to defer their capex, or they go ahead and spend in this volatility?
See, each company will have to make their own decision based on the realities of their market and their industry. For us, a weak rupee and stronger exports is actually helping. And also, some of these things that I talked about, India's need for additional power, the investments in many of these growth areas around semiconductors, solar, and data centers, they are happening irrespective of which economic scenario we look at. So for us, the answer is clear because we are seeing those inquiries and that pipeline building. We have to invest, and so each industry, depending on the realities of their industry, and whether they are exporters or importers, how their customers will behave, will have to make their own decisions. It will be interesting for sure. I don't think there is a one size fits all. The answer will depend by industry and by company.
And how do you look at the role these FTAs which India is signing with many of the geographies, whether it's UK, we have done it with the Australia, we have one with ASEAN, European Union is expected by end of the year, the trade negotiation with the US is underway. Are these something which will help, push export oriented capex within the country, or there will be it's going to be a wait and watch of how it pans out?
Um, Overall, of course, positive. All these FTAs, our implementation schedule is across multiple years. So the Europe FTA will not come into effect for still quite some time, and then even there is gradual uptake on variety of different products. how that FTA will get implemented. So the ones that India would most likely positively be impacted by is the US FTA, because of the size of the trade, and followed quickly by the FTA with Europe and with EU. Both of these FTAs have got tremendous long-term potential to increase India's competitiveness from an exports point perspective, but they will take some time before they result in impact on the ground. Yeah, but they will surely result in impact on the ground. Some of the other FTAs with the Middle East, with Australia, and to a smaller extent with the UK. UK is a much bigger economy that way. Will start to have impact, but the quantum, just because of the size of the interaction, will be relatively slightly smaller. US and Europe are the two big FTAs, which should help India in both matters, both sides.
One country we haven't named in our discussion on private capex is China. Their economy is slowing down. There is a lot of dumping that may come into emerging countries like India, and that also has a bigger bearing in the way private capex is put in place in our country. What is your assessment on that?
See, my assessment is we can sit on the sidelines and keep crying what China will do, or we can do something about it. And certainly in areas that are emerging of newer technologies where innovation can happen, China is no longer just the cheapest market, they are also the highest technology market. And that holds true for automotive, that holds true for batteries, renewables, hydrogen, many areas, electronics, many areas that we talk about. And I don't think Indian industry can afford to just sit on the sidelines and cry that China can import and Chinese imports can come into India at any time. And I don't think we are doing that either. Yeah, automotive is a good example where US is, and Europe also to a large extent, is looking at putting barriers. India is putting barriers, but domestic companies are really investing in EV technology and ramping up our capability and our products. And some of our cars that are coming up are really good. In fact, they're starting to export more out of India. So I think India should look at it more as a glass half full. China competition is real. Expect government to support where Indian capacity is real and it needs support. Where India does not have capacity, we will have to let Chinese imports into the country, because otherwise, on the other end, it doesn't allow us to be competitive on exports in that area either. And there are many such sectors where some of, like chemicals, many of our derivative products that we are very good at, the inputs come from plants in China. But if India has no capacity for those and China imports are cheap, we should allow that. Yeah, but where India has capacity, which is good, cost competitive, and where there is real reason to understand that China is actually dumping, there the government has been good and smart in limiting those items from coming into the country.
It was a pleasure talking to you and getting a perspective on the private capex cycle. Thank you very much for joining us. That was Ashish Bhandari, MD and CEO of Thermax, giving us a perspective on the private capex cycle where we are at this point in time. Thank you for watching Deep Dive.